I'm Alexander Hefner, your host on The Open Mind, and I'm honored to welcome today to our broadcast an activist, a humanitarian, a minister, and a scholar, Niall Fort at Princeton University. He joins us today. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Niall, first, I know that you yourself had COVID. I want to ask you about your health. How are you feeling?
I'm not 100%, but I'm much, much better. I have my taste back, which is probably the most important thing after my smell back. And I'm back to working out. So I feel good. Thank you for asking.
That's a relief to hear. I'm glad you're getting better, if not in 100% condition. You have been so eloquent and poignant in your commentary on this crisis and the humanitarian and religious awakening. I wondered if we could just start there. How would you characterize if the response to the pandemic has been a kind of awakening? How would you define it? How would you describe it for our viewers?
But I love the way that Arundhati Roy describes it. A writer, wrote The God of Small Things, recently wrote The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, a novelist, an activist. She described it in a recent essay as a portal, talking about the pandemic as a portal. And part of why I like that is that it suggests that there is no going back to normal. There's no going back to normal. It's going to lead us somewhere. And the question one is, where is it going to lead us? And two is, what are we going to bring with us? So she has these amazing lines at the end of the essay that talks about, are we going to carry the carcasses of our past, the wars, the guns, the exploitation of the earth through that portal with us and essentially recreate what we already had? Or are we going to walk lightly on the earth? Are we going to carry less baggage? And are we going to come into this new world with the excitement about possibly building and transforming the world? And so I love that analogy of a portal, and I think that it's dead on.
If you were to answer that question, Niall, reimagining this next stage of human existence, what is a realistic aspiration that can achieve the ideals that we have not been able to achieve in recent decades and even centuries?
Sure. I mean, I actually want to take a step back before we get into what's realistic or not. And I actually think that what's so remarkable about this moment is that it gives us an opportunity to completely reimagine what it would be like to live into the world, what it would look like for us to not have to work to live. We have so many people who are currently unemployed, so many people who are struggling to eat. We have so many children who are struggling to receive their education because they're hungry or because they're crowded in dilapidated housing. So what would it look like, one, for us to back away from what's realistic, but to think about what's possible? In the heyday of slavery, it was not realistic to think about Black people being born outside of plantations. And so we have to remember that. We have to remember that the best of what's happened in the world did not happen because it was realistic. James Baldwin says that I know what I'm asking of you is impossible, but then he said, the impossible is the least that we can demand. And I think in a world that's marked by so much oppression, a part of what happens is that it limits our imagination. I'm reading this really cool book called The Body Keeps the Score, and it's about trauma and the body and the mind. And it talks about how people who are traumatized oftentimes have this assault on our imagination, on thinking about what might be possible. So I actually want to start there. I want to think about, what does a world look like where everyone has what they need to thrive? What does a world look like where no child not only goes hungry, but has the opportunity not only to go to a decent school, but to experience the world where they can go to the park and not be killed by a police officer like Tamir Rice was, or can walk down the street like Michael Brown did and eventually attend college, which he was supposed to do 2 days later, or who can sleep on their auntie's couch like Aiyana Stanley Jones in peace and not be raided and eventually shot and killed at, I believe, 7 years old. And then beyond that, how do we think about thriving and flourishing? I don't want to fight for a world where we're just making it. I don't want to fight for a world where my kids or our kids just don't get killed by police. I want a world where they can thrive, where they can imagine, where they can think about what's possible and actually act on that without being so bombarded with questions of police brutality, so bombarded with the fear of not making it home safely. And so I want to think about that